Our next speaker is Neil Selbie. Neil is the principal of his own independent financial advisory business, and without any further ado, Neil's going to talk to us about the importance of placing emphasis on your people in your business. Thank you, Neil.
So you might be asking yourself, what can you learn from an independent financial advisor? I'm going to share with you three things. I want to share with you some mistakes that I've made and the lessons that I've learned from those mistakes and what I've done about them. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we might create a framework for making some smart decisions around investment as both investors and as leaders. Excuse me. So I want to take you back to January 2008. It was an exciting time for me. I started my business. And as excited as I was, it was also a terrible time for investors. It was the start of what would become the global financial crisis. And so I want you to imagine if you were an investor at that time, and maybe some of you were, and you had $1 million in your portfolio, and watch over the next 18 months as that $1 million turns into $800,000, $700,000, and by the end of 18 months, about $600,000. And imagine all the emotions that you had to run through during that time and how difficult it would have been. And for some of us, it's happening right now. Jono showed me his super balance just before. and the chart doesn't look good. And so some of you might be thinking, well, that was probably my first mistake, was starting my business at a terrible time. But in reality, the timing couldn't have been better. It turns out there was no more valuable time for an independent voice than in a time of crisis. And so I realized I actually had some value to add to people and decided at that point I was going to grow this business so that it didn't die with me. And that was my real mistake, was underestimating the challenge and how difficult it was going to be to grow. So this originally said my mistake, and then it was changed to my mistakes. So the first mistake, fast forward 8 years. So everything went really well and I started growing the business, and I got to a point where I had a senior advisor, a junior advisor, and a support staff team around me, and I was really happy. And things were going great, clients were getting good results, everyone was getting good results post-GFC, so that was great. And we were helping a lot of people. And then I decided to celebrate a bit of my success by going on a holiday with my family. I had 2 kids at the time, I have 3 now. We went overseas for 4 weeks, which was quite a big step for a small business owner. And when I got back, on the Sunday evening, I was going into work on the Monday morning. On the Sunday evening, I read my emails, which I shouldn't have done, but I did. And I saw my senior advisor put in his resignation. And I didn't see it coming at all. And I should have. And I felt betrayed. I felt like I felt that he wasn't courageous enough to have a face-to-face meeting with me to at least give me that courtesy. And then upon reflection, sometime after, I realized it wasn't actually betrayal that I felt initially. And it wasn't anger, and it wasn't upset, it wasn't scared, which I felt all those things afterwards. But the first feeling that I actually had was relief. And it was relief because when my senior advisor came on board, I dangled a carrot, which was equity, potential partnership. And what I realized over the course of working with him was I didn't actually want him as my partner. I liked him in the role of a senior advisor, but I didn't really want him as a partner, and I made it hard. And my focus was all on myself, completely on myself, and I didn't listen to his needs. And so it's not surprising at all that he did what he did. You'd think that would be a lesson learned, and it was. But to fill the gap that I now had that was now created, I turned to my junior advisor that same day, by the way, walked over, had that meeting on the Monday, walked over to the junior advisor, and thinking, what a perfect opportunity for him to step up, and what a perfect way for me to fill the gap. And when I had that conversation with him, he closed the door, because I had it open, he closed the door and he shared with me that he'd been thinking for a while that maybe this wasn't for him, and he quit. And I lost 2 advisors on that day. It broke me, and I thought, I'm a failure. I can't do this. I can give advice, but I can't grow this business. I can't manage people. I can't deal with people. So what I really learned there was I didn't create a platform or an environment for my staff to share with me what they truly were thinking. I was focused all on myself. I wish I could tell you that was the end of the mistakes, but there was one more. So I managed to hire a senior advisor who's still with me, and he's great, and we've made a lot of change, and I'll tell you about that change too. But having lost the junior advisor, I needed to fill that gap. And so I turned to one of my longest standing employees who had had almost every corporate support role within the business, and asked him whether he would step up and become an advisor. And he took on the challenge. And after about 3 months, I knew he couldn't do it. I came across, which some of you may have heard of, the Peter principle, which is you raise to the level of your own incompetence within an organization. And I gave him the job not because of his merit, but because I needed him to do the job. And he failed. He could not deliver. And instead of addressing it straight away, like I should have done, I let that drag on for about 6 months and didn't have the honest, difficult conversation that needed to be had. And it cost me a lot of money. And it ended badly in that it was swift, like ripping off a Band-Aid. And what I did there was I completely ignored him and stopped supporting him. And he was destined to fail. So, as leaders, I challenge you with these 3 questions then. How much focus is on your people rather than yourself? And are you addressing their fears and their ambition? And then finally, what are you doing to support their growth? And what honest conversations are you having with them or not having with them? So I've learned from these mistakes. And what we did as an organization is exactly this. We come up with our values. And we sat with the team and we talked over what is it that we stand for and what is important to us. And we developed our values, and I'm glad to say that's a lesson learned, is that we now hire and we train and we learn from each other based on those values. And at the same time, we recognized that we needed to we're leaders to our to both our people, but also to our clients. Our clients are reliant on us to help them make smart decisions with their money. We need to lead them in that conversation. And so I realized that without being an independent financial advisor, we're not owned or associated with any institutions. We don't have our own products to sell, so no one's telling us what to do. But that's a double-edged sword, because we need to be the leader. We need to come up with the solutions. And so how do you do that? We developed an investment philosophy, something that we can rely on, that we can fall back on, that we can also use as a tool for hiring the right sort of advisors. It's an education tool. It's something that we can share with our trusted advisors and trusted professionals and hire, and as I say, hire advisors based on that. So this is our investment philosophy, which I'll share with you. 3 points. I'm not going to talk too much to this. There's a hard copy of this, and we'll send it round to those that are live streamed as well, and everyone will get a soft copy. But essentially, the 3 core parts of our investment philosophy are no forecasting. Who could have seen what was coming right now? And if your investment philosophy, if your investments are based on a philosophy that you can predict the future, I'm willing to bet you were surprised by this. Warren Buffett's got a great quote, and he says, "Forecasts tell you more about the forecaster than they do about the future." So be careful with forecasts, is my view. The second is to employ a scientific approach. So follow the evidence. If there's no robustness to the strategy, if it doesn't make sense, then you're going to miss out on returns because you're not following the science. And academic science is actually telling us what the answers are when it comes to investment. We know how to invest money, but as I was saying to earlier, knowing what to do and doing it are two different things. And so finally, it's customized to you. And so every one of our clients is different. Everybody's unique. And so if you don't have a unique approach, or if you don't customize that approach, and likewise, if you take these to leadership and you focus on your people and don't have a cookie cutter approach to how you approach your people, every one of them are unique. And you've got to customize your approach to them. And that's something I've had to learn the hard way. This chart, I'm hoping, is going to give you a little bit of certainty or a little bit of calm about the future. And I want to take you on a journey of a 50-year investment journey, starting back in 1970. So I might turn to this one. Apologies for my back to you guys. And so back in the early 70s, we had the Arab oil embargo. Oil prices quadrupled and the S&P dropped nearly 43%. A few years later, we had Business Week saying it's the death of equities. Gold hits record highs, inflation's climbing, but notice along the way, while we're getting these dips, we're also getting climbs. And the story's pretty clear what happens over the long term. And so the lesson learned from this is that a disciplined investor looks beyond the concerns of today and enjoys the rewards of tomorrow. Now, fast forward to, where was it? There. That's where my story started in 2008 with my clients going through that, what would be a 46% drop in the S&P. But the good news for those that had a plan in place, that had discipline, that had reserves, and that knew what they weren't acting on emotion and weren't allowing themselves to fall victim to what was going on around them, they came out of it. And if this presentation was done in December, I would have said they more than doubled their money. And of course, now we're going through a tough time. But the question I've got is, if you look at that chart, and yes, this is only till 2019, so there's now a dip here, and the future is uncertain. That's always the case. And it was uncertain back there, and it was uncertain back there, and it was uncertain back there. And it's always uncertain. And so we have to make decisions today based on what we know, without forecasting what may happen. We can have an idea of what might happen. But I'm pretty optimistic about the future despite what's going on. Because when you look at the general trend and you ignore the noise and you look at the signal, it's pretty good. And I also think that as human beings, we have a way of coming back from crises. And we're going to show resilience. And as far as I know, companies who, this is what this is about, we're investing in corporations, they have a way of making money and working their way through crises. That's what they're designed to do. So trust in the system. So I thought I'd also share with you then some points of where do investors go wrong. So these three things. They have a lack of strategic planning and management. And by the way, that's the number one reason that corporates fail as well. A lack of that and poor cash flow management. But that's the number one reason of corporate failure. The second is following poor advice. So think about all those investors that either didn't follow advice, didn't have advice, or followed advice of, say, well-meaning friends and family. And I always say well-meaning because it is well-meaning, but if they don't, they've all got their own biases, they've all got their own preconceptions, and they're not necessarily knowledgeable, nor do they, the advice they might give isn't necessarily the right advice for you, might be the right advice for them. And the other is following the media. So if you go back and you were listening to the media there, the death of equities, and you thought, well, time to get out, The media is not there to educate us. It is there to sell space between advertising. Greed and fear. That is the big one. So that's our emotions, getting the better of us. And right now it's very, very easy to be fearful. Very, very easy. And to quote Buffett again, I have to, he says, be fearless when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearless. Fearful, sorry. And I want to remind everybody about one thing. We talked about this just yesterday. Was in the panic selling here, where people are selling shares. You get it. Remember, for every sale, there's a buy. Someone's buying those shares. There can't be a sale without a buy. So when you hear the media saying there's more selling than buying, or the sellers are out today, question that. Who's buying those shares? The people that are buying those shares are the people that have a longer term view, that have a higher risk tolerance, and that are looking towards the future as a positive thing, rather than those that are shitting themselves today. So finally, to wrap up, I'm going to give you a framework for how we might make smarter decisions in the future. And so the first is an emergency fund. So hopefully everybody's got emergency funds stacked away. And emergency funds allow you in rainy days and in terrible times, and when the proverbial's hitting the fan and there's no toilet paper, to turn back and rely on them. The second is having a clear, well-developed strategic plan. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to get to where you need to be. You don't even probably know where you need to be. The third is to diversify. Diversification allows us to optimize the amount of return we're going to get for the risk that we're putting out there. So think of, and take, I hope you're seeing this in America, and taking these lessons back to leadership and saying, well, are you too reliant on key people within your business? What avenues have you been too reliant on a particular revenue stream within your business? What are you doing about that now? Stay disciplined. The disciplined investor gets through tough times. They ride it out. Provided they've got emergency funds and a clear developed plan and they're diversifying, they've got to maintain that discipline in order to see the good times come back. And my final thought is to focus on what you can control. So when all else is lost, and I've got to quote Viktor Frankl from his book, The Last Human Freedom, and I've written it down so I don't want to mess it up, sorry. He says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So I'll leave you with that thought. I do have an exercise, but in light of live streaming in the room, I'm happy to take that offline and to maybe take some of you through that during the break or another time. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Always fascinating at a leadership summit to hear from an independent financial advisor, and really great lessons there, Neil. Thank you for linking it back to us as well.